Ary, Indiana sits just outside Chicago, often unnoticed, but its streets have been awash in blood for decades. In the early 1990s, Gary infamously topped the nation's murder rankings. A billboard at the city limits in 1993 warned drivers, "Caution, you are currently in Gary N, 1993 murder capital of the nation. Proceed with extreme caution." That year, Gary, population tilted to 110 homicides, suffered 110 homicides, a staggering rate of 91 murders per 100,000 people, nearly 10 times the US average. This bleak title, Murder Capital, would haunt Gary's reputation even as the national spotlight remained fixed on its bigger neighbor, Chicago. Today, Gary still bleeds. In 2023, the city recorded 52 homicides, down slightly from the previous year, now an alarming toll for a city now under 75,000 people. Per capita, Gary's violence rivals the worst big city neighborhoods in Chicago, yet little of this carnage makes headlines beyond Northwest Indiana. Before we get started on this video, make sure you go check out my website that's in the description, where I post viral videos daily, and plus make sure you like the video and share it with someone to spread the violence awareness.
First breaking news this Monday, a 1-year-old boy playing outside in Gary shot. Police say a 19-year-old was watching the little boy and 2 other children while they played in a yard on West 25th Avenue. Someone nearby started firing. The teen and the 1-year-old were shot. Both are in serious condition. That's the latest thing. Tonight, a 15-year-old is among 2 people found dead in this Gary, Indiana home. The victims are identified as 15-year-old Ary Aaron and 39-year-old Kelton Aaron. Police are not saying how the 2 victims died. Officers discovered the bodies at the home in Gary's Glen Park neighborhood late this afternoon.
Unlike Chicago's gang wars, endlessly analyzed in documentaries and hip-hop blogs, Gary's street war rages quietly and without fanfare. Block by block, the city next door to Chicago endures a deadly cycle, largely alone. One reason Gary's violence is so intense is its tangled ties to Chicago's gang culture. During the 1990s and 2000s, as Chicago demolished infamous housing projects, many displaced gang members spilled over into nearby Indiana. Gary, part of the Chicagoland area, became a new base for some of these criminals. As a 2008 federal report noted, Gary is among the most violent cities in America, with entrenched gangs like the Gangster Disciples, Vice Lords, Imperial Gangsters, and Latin Kings dominating its streets. These are the very same gang nations that originated in Chicago, now extending their reach into Gary's neighborhoods. One reason Gary's violence is so intense is its tangled ties to Chicago's gang culture. During the 1990s and 2000s, as Chicago demolished infamous housing projects, many displaced gang members spilled over into nearby Indiana. Gary, part of the Chicagoland area, became a new base for some of these criminals. As a 2008 federal report noted, Gary is among the most violent cities in America, with entrenched gangs like the Gangster Disciples, Vice Lords, Imperial Gangsters, and Latin Kings dominating its streets. These are the very same gang nations that originated in Chicago, now extending their reach into Gary's neighborhoods. Proximity to Chicago also means a flood of firearms. Indiana's lax gun laws have made places like Gary a pipeline for illegal guns into Chicago. Gang members easily obtain pistols and even assault rifles in Indiana and funnel them across state lines. Many Chicago crime guns trace back to Gary's gun shops and straw buyers. Of course, those guns are also used right at home in Gary. Heavily armed crews patrol the city's derelict streets, ready to shoot at the slightest provocation. The result, a quietly simmering war that has given Gary a homicide rate often higher than Chicago's, even if the outside world barely notices. Gary's street wars have produced tragedies every bit as horrifying as those in Chicago, including the murder of children. One recent case shocked even veteran detectives. On February 15, 2023, around noon, 13-year-old Ary Dodson was chased down and executed on a sidewalk outside a Gary church. Responding officers found the boy lying face down by the church's front doors, shot multiple times, once in the back and twice in the legs. Evidence showed Ary was running for his life when bullets struck him from behind. Why would anyone target a 13-year-old? According to Lake County prosecutors, Ary was killed for disrespecting a gang. Investigators uncovered that 2 teenage gunmen, 17-year-old members of a local clique called the 49th Avenue Boys, allegedly murdered Ary as retaliation. His disrespect was shockingly trivial, insulting a slain member of the 49th Avenue Boys and throwing down their gang signs on social media. In the world of gangs, those gestures were a capital offense. Police say the teen shooters hunted Ary down on behalf of their gang's honor, a chilling echo of Chicago's gang feuds, where even minor slights on Facebook or in rap lyrics can lead to murder. The killers were barely older than their victim. Both alleged gunmen, Davy Brunson and Kristen Barbie, were only 17. They now face first-degree murder charges with sentencing enhancements for using a firearm and for gang affiliation. One accomplice, a 21-year-old getaway driver, was charged as well. In August 2024, a jury convicted Kristen Barbie, and a judge sentenced him with 125 years in prison for Ary's murder. His co-defendants await trial. The case pulled back the curtain on Gary's underworld. During the investigation, authorities executed 50 search warrants and uncovered substantial evidence of gang crimes tied to the 49th Avenue Boys, including multiple homicides, drug trafficking, and gun running across the region. In other words, this one clique had been waging a quiet reign of terror, leaving a trail of bodies without any national media coverage. Gary's gang war is very real, even if it's largely ignored in silence. Like Chicago, Gary's street culture has given rise to a gritty rap scene that overlaps with the gang conflicts. Local rappers rap about the violence around them and sometimes become targets or perpetrators of that violence themselves. Yet few outside Indiana have heard of Gary's underground rap figures, who lack the wider recognition of Chicago drill stars. The quest for clout can push these artists to extreme moves to get attention. One Gary rapper, who calls himself Scroo G, recently grabbed headlines in the drill community for boldly inserting himself into Chicago's gang beef. In 2024, Scroo G went on Instagram Live and taunted members of Chicago's FBG Flyboy Gang, a gangster disciple affiliated rap crew, even going so far as to disrespect the memory of slain Chicago GD rapper FBG Duck. In his profanity-laced rant, Scroo G bragged that FBG weren't as dangerous as they claimed and provocatively said he was smoking on Duck, a phrase gangs use to insult the dead. He essentially challenged Chicago's GDs, saying none of them had avenged Duck and that he'd take on any of them who wanted static.
You're from Gary, Indiana. You dirty as hell and stink out there. I'm ready to die. I don't give a shit. I want y'all to know that. Listen very closely. I don't give a about life. You do. Listen very closely. I throw all this shit away today. Is you ready to do that?
Yeah, tag Billy bitch ass, washed up old ass, dirty bum ass. Got more paper than you, stupid. What is wrong with you? Then you just break your legs, you ain't gonna be able to run nobody down, clown ass. Swag your ass, make Mexican music, Puerto Rican music. Ain't nobody doing no song with your washed up ass, dude. Then you gonna keep talking about everybody who this duck died. Even on any that no Scrooly, on my dead cousin, this on me at all times. Any twice my size, once my size, bro. You walk up on me, look at me wrong, anything. I guarantee you I'll face your ass where we at, nigga. On my dead cousin. I guarantee you I'll leave your ass right where you at, nigga. On bro grade.
The response from Chicago was swift and fierce. King Yella, a well-known Chicago rapper close to FBG Duck, blasted Scroo G as an out-of-line clout chaser. He went live to curse out that Indiana-ass, out-of-town-ass rapper, telling him to keep Duck's name out of his mouth and threatening him with violence in return. The exchange was heated and deeply personal, with Yella even insulting Scrooly's deceased relatives in retaliation. To Chicago street rappers, a Gary outsider meddling in their war was intolerable. This social media feud might have seemed like typical internet posturing, but in the world of drill, online words do spill into real-world bloodshed. Indeed, Scroo G learned how real it can get. In late 2023, during a music video shoot on Gary's West Side, gunmen opened fire on Scroo G and his crew. In footage later posted online, the rapper is seen dancing for the camera before sudden gunshots sent everyone diving for cover. Dozens of rounds reportedly ripped through the scene. Miraculously, no one was injured in the ambush, but the message was clear. Whether the shooting was an attempted hit by rivals or a warning, it proved that Gary's street music scene is just as combustible as Chicago's. Rappers here are not shielded by fame or fortune. They live in the same crosshairs as any gang member on the block. Gary's rap talents have largely flown under the radar. The city's one breakout star, Freddy Gibbs, spoke often of Gary's ruthless streets in his music, painting them as a vice lords and gangster disciples' battleground, much like Chicago's South Side. Gibbs himself once admitted past affiliation with the vice lords, but for the most part, Gary's new generation of drill artists remain unheard outside the region. They rap for local audiences and YouTube viewers, documenting the pain and carnage around them without the world watching. It is a scene of raw stories and often tragic outcomes, young men trying to rap their way out of blight, sometimes getting gunned down before they ever get a chance. Police suspect that at least one Gary rapper's murder in recent years was a direct result of his lyrics antagonizing rivals. In East Chicago, a neighboring city, a 25-year-old Gary rapper was gunned down after allegedly talking trash in his rhymes, according to investigators who believe his music provoked the fatal beef. The cycle of diss tracks and payback killings that Chicago's drill scene is infamous for has quietly taken root in Gary as well. Gary, Indiana Street War is a portrait of urban violence and obscurity. The city sits next to one of America's largest metros, yet its struggles rarely register in the national consciousness. Chicago's gang crises have been featured in endless news reports, documentaries, even movie storylines. Meanwhile, Gary's equally deadly feuds carry on in the shadows. No trending hashtags, no viral documentaries. The victims are just as dead, the community is just as scarred by grief and fear. As one lifelong resident lamented, outsiders only see Gary as a decaying steel town or a crime statistic, not a place where real people are caught in a nightmare. Yet the nightmare is very real. Children like Ary Dodson have been executed over trivial grudges. Block parties have turned into mass shooting scenes. In one 2022 incident, a holiday block party in Gary ended with 3 killed and 7 wounded in a drive-by attack. Neighborhoods like Glen Park, downtown/midtown, and the east side grapple with daily gunfire and retaliatory strikes. Entire blocks lie abandoned, pockmarked with bullet holes and makeshift memorials resembling a war zone. Those who live there feel forgotten. We continue to lose Gary residents to needless violence. Young people gunned down before they even reach adulthood. The city's mayor lamented after the block party massacre, which claimed his own cousin's life. What makes Gary's situation especially poignant is the silence. There is no massive protest movement or media crusade focused on saving Gary. Its troubles are often lumped into Chicago's or ignored entirely. The city bleeds alone. Gary's quiet street war goes on with only local police, grassroots activists, and bereaved families paying attention. One of Gary's most infamous gang feuds erupted on the city's east side between a crew known as the 22nd Avenue Boys, a local clique affiliated with the Vice Lords, and a rival gang from the nearby Marshalltown neighborhood. This beef started over drug turf and quickly turned into open warfare. In the late 1990s, Tajuan Tai Allen ran a thriving crack cocaine operation on 22nd Avenue, and he let his guys sell dope on that turf, even those who didn't live in the neighborhood, as long as they were loyal to him. When competition over territory heated up, Allen's enforcers decided to send a message in blood. It kicked off with a drive-by shooting that left a rival dealer named Omar King dead. According to court testimony, Allen's close associates, Jamel, Lil Mike Rusan, and William Curtis, went on a mission into Marshalltown and gunned King down simply because he was slipping caught on court on his own block. Killing a Marshalltown gang member on his home turf was like lighting a fuse. Retaliation came fast. Not long after King's murder, a carload of Marshalltown shooters riddled a 22nd Ave member's family home with bullets in revenge. Miraculously, no one in the house was killed by the spray of gunfire, but the message was clear. The cycle of vengeance had begun. Rusan warned his crew that after the Omar King hit, beef on for life with Marshalltown. In other words, a permanent war was now in effect. The 22nd Avenue Boys vs. Marshalltown feud only escalated from there, with both sides stalking each other through Gary's streets. And the violence wasn't limited to rival enemies, it also turned inward. In 1999, Ty Allen's crew murdered one of their own men over a mere suspicion of disloyalty. A dealer named Don Terrell Hamilton was suspected of stealing drugs from William Curtis during a sale. Rather than let it slide, Allen decided to make an example of Hamilton. Allen invited Hamilton on a ride to Gary's Delaney projects under false pretenses, essentially leading him to a remote spot for an execution. There, Allen coldly told the young man it was his death day, and Rawson proceeded to shoot Hamilton 10 times at point-blank range, killing him on the spot. The crew then hit the gun and even drove Curtis out to see Hamilton's dead body to prove the deed was done. It was an unusually brutal betrayal, murdering a friend from the same set, all to enforce discipline and fear within the gang. The aftermath of this turf war was a trail of bodies and a major federal case. Rousseau and Curtis were eventually arrested and convicted on racketeering, drug conspiracy, and murder charges for their roles in Ty Allen's operation. Both men received multiple life sentences in federal prison. At trial, former allies testified how the 22nd Avenue Boys had run a floating crack house operation backed by armed enforcers, leaving wounded and murdered friends and enemies their wake across Gary. The 22nd vs. Marshalltown feud showed how even a small Gary neighborhood beef could explode into lifelong vendettas, with gang members' mothers' homes shot up in drive-bys and trusted insiders turned into cold-blooded killers overnight. It remains one of Gary's wildest gangland tales of betrayal and revenge. Shoot on sight, the Imperial Gangsters' reign of terror. While some Gary gangs warred over neighborhood turf, an extremely violent crew of the Imperial Gangsters was busy turning the whole Northwest Indiana region into a shooting gallery. The Imperial Gangsters, originally a Chicago Puerto Rican gang, had a powerful clique based in neighboring East Chicago, and they extended their influence into Hammond and Gary as well. By the 2000s, this gang had established hardcore rules for its members. They were ordered to shoot on sight any rival gang member who entered their territory, and to kill anyone selling drugs on their turf without permission. This wasn't just talk, they lived by these rules in blood. Over roughly a decade, the Imperial Gangsters were accused of committing at least 13 homicides across East Chicago, Hammond, and Gary, along with 19 attempted murders, all as part of a ruthless bid to control the drug trade. 2015, a sweeping federal indictment finally brought this murder spree to light, charging 24 members of the gang under the RICO law. One Imperial gangster in particular, Juan Tito Briseño, became infamous for his brutality. Briseño was a young leader who personally pulled the trigger in 5 murders during the late 2000s. His murderous resume reads like something out of a horror story. In 2007, Briseño walked up to a rival's apartment door in Hammond and then shot the man dead point blank as soon as he answered. The victim, Luis Ortiz, was targeted solely because he was a member of the Latin Kings, the Imperial Gangsters' sworn enemies. But Briseño was just getting started. On June 3, 2008, he and his accomplices ambushed 2 men coming home with takeout food for their pregnant girlfriends, simply because one of them was a Latin king living in IG territory. Briseño opened fire and killed Miguel Mejias, the rival, and Michael Sessom, Mejia's friend, even though they were unarmed and literally carrying dinner. The scene was absolute chaos. Multiple bullets went flying into the house, hitting a woman in the arm while she was holding her infant child during the barrage. Mejias had reportedly tried to broker peace beforehand. He sent word that he was no longer gangbanging and didn't want trouble, but Briseño coldly replied, "Fit him, he was going to bring kings into our neighborhood," and proceeded with the hit. This level of zero remorse violence shocked even veteran investigators. Briseño's killing spree continued into 2010. In February of that year, he got into a Wild West style shootout with a rival 2-6 gang member, Miguel Colon, outside a party. Both men exchanged gunfire in a residential area until Colon fell dead, stray bullets endangering bystanders nearby. And just a few months later, Briseño executed perhaps his coldest killing. On June 19, 2010, he spotted an unauthorized drug dealer, LaTroy Howard, operating in an IG-controlled neighborhood. Surveillance footage later showed Briseño circling the block in his car, then sneaking up on foot. He walked right up behind the unarmed Howard and shot him twice in the head at point-blank range, leaving him dead on the sidewalk. All this carnage was carried out to enforce the gang's fearsome reputation. Briseño even bragged about his killings to younger gang shorties, encouraging them to earn their stripes through violence. By the time the law caught up, the Imperial Gangsters had left Northwest Indiana residents terrorized, afraid that any wrong color or misstep could make them the next target. When federal agents finally took down Briseño and his crew, the full scope of the gang's terror campaign was revealed. Briseño was convicted of 5 murders in aid of racketeering and attempted murder and conspiracy charges, earning him a life sentence. At trial, witnesses described how the Imperial Gangsters enforced a shoot-on-sight code, turning neighborhoods into war zones. Briseño's lack of remorse was chilling. Prosecutors noted he showed no regrets, only pride in the murders he committed. The indictment tied the gang to 13 homicides in the region, making it one of the bloodiest gang enterprises in Gary's history. For a time, the Imperial Gangsters virtually held parts of Gary hostage under their violent rule. Their downfall brought some relief to the community, but the gruesome stories of Briseño's attacks, like the slaughter of a rival delivering food to his pregnant girlfriend, remain some of the craziest gangland tales ever documented in the area. The Latin Kings, a gang with Chicago origins, also carved out a fearsome reputation in Gary and surrounding cities, unleashing a wave of violence that led to one of the largest indictments in the region's history. In 2017, federal prosecutors charged 43 members of the Latin Kings under RICO statutes, exposing a 14-year conspiracy 203017 that involved everything from drug trafficking to gun attacks, sex trafficking, and murder. The indictment painted a picture of a vicious enterprise extending from Chicago into Hammond, East Chicago, and Gary. The Latin Kings had embedded themselves in Northwest Indiana, and they enforced their power with brutal efficiency, targeting rivals and sometimes even innocent bystanders in their quest for dominance. Among the Latin Kings' crimes were some truly shocking murders. Perhaps most tragic was the killing of a 15-year-old boy named Victor Luzinski. On April 12, 2009, young Victor was just riding his bicycle near an elementary school in Hammond when a Latin King member rolled up and shot him in the head with a .22 caliber pistol. The shooter, 28-year-old Derek Deuce Balodoled, later admitted he murdered the teen simply because he thought the boy was a rival gang member. It was a senseless, cold-blooded execution of a child, illustrating how even minors weren't off limits in these gang wars, and that wasn't the only innocent life cut short. On December 10, 2013, a 22-year-old Gary man named Rolando Correa became another casualty of Latin King violence in the most unexpected way. Correa noticed his next-door neighbors were being terrorized in a home invasion robbery, and he bravely ran over to help. Little did he know, the robbers were Latin King members carrying out a targeted hit, and one of them, 44-year-old Robert Cowboy Neal, was listening to a police scanner outside to coordinate the crime. As Correa intervened, the gang members shot him dead. He died trying to be a good Samaritan, killed as a direct result of a Latin King plot. These two killings, a teenage boy on a bike and a young man aiding his neighbors, showed the complete disregard for human life that the gang had in its quest to intimidate the community. The Latin Kings also engaged in classic gang against gang brutality in Gary's orbit. In one case of mistaken identity, they ended up killing the wrong person. On October 28, 2014, Latin King members in Hammond were hunting for a rival and thought they spotted him, Martin Hurtado Jr. A hitman named Anton James opened fire on the target and killed him, except it wasn't the right man. The victim was Martin Hurtado Sr., the 52-year-old father of the intended target, who happened to resemble his son. An innocent father was slain purely because the gang believed he was someone else. It doesn't get much more tragic or outrageous than that. Another incident showed the Kings' audacity in enforcing their will. In August 2014, members of the Latin Kings decided to punish a local business for serving their enemies. They got word that Estrella's bar in Hammond was allowing rival gang members to patronize the establishment. In retaliation, a Latin King crew drove to the bar late one night and sprayed it with bullets. They struck and killed a 34-year-old patron named Raudel Contreras, who was inside the bar just having a drink. Contreras had no gang affiliation. He died because the gang wanted to send a message to the bar owner. This kind of extreme militancy, shooting up a public bar over gang grudges, underscores how brazen the Latin Kings' reign had become in the Gary area. Law enforcement's crackdown on the Latin Kings brought many of these facts to light. By 2018, dozens of Latin King members, from street soldiers to shot callers, were convicted for their roles in the conspiracy. The charges detailed that the gang's activities included murder, attempted murder, assault, kidnapping, and even sex trafficking of underage girls. Federal investigators revealed that from 2003 to 2017, the Latin Kings had essentially operated as a shadow government of crime in Northwest Indiana, with a structured hierarchy funneling drugs, cocaine, marijuana, pills into the region and enforcing control through fear, They carried out retaliatory arson such as torching houses in Gary's Glen Park area during internecine disputes and ordered hits on anyone who crossed them. One of the Latin King's own, former regional leaders Joseph Little Humble, Uvalia, was even charged with prostituting young women to raise funds for the gang. The breadth of their criminal activity was stunning. U.S. attorneys noted that this was part of a multi-year effort to dismantle violent gangs in Northwest Indiana, following earlier RICO cases against the Imperial Gangsters and others. The Land King saga in Gary stands out not only for the body count and brutality of their beefs, but also for how deeply they infiltrated the community, from corrupting teenagers to frightening local businesses. It took a massive joint task force involving the FBI, ATF, local police, and others to finally bring the hammer down on them. Even as many Latin Kings now sit behind bars, the stories of a 15-year-old boy shot off his bike or a bar sprayed with bullets over gang honor continue to loom large in Gary's lore of gangland insanity. Not to be outdone, another gang with Chicago roots, the 2-6 Nation, also left its mark on Gary with a crime rampage that lasted over 2 decades. By 2014, authorities had seen enough and unveiled a federal indictment charging 8 members and associates of the 2-6 gang in a sweeping racketeering conspiracy. This case was described as the third major use of the RICO statute against violent street gangs in Northwest Indiana, following the Latin Kings and Imperial Gangsters crackdowns. And for good reason. The 2-6 indictment alleged criminal activity spanning from 1992 all the way to 2014. In that time, prosecutors say the gang's members were responsible for drug trafficking, marijuana, cocaine, crack, heroin, ecstasy, and multiple murders and shootings in the region. The 2-6 might not have been as large as the Latin Kings, but they proved just as deadly in defending their turf. Specific murders attributed to the 2-6 crew include the July 13, 1999 slaying of Jose Pena Jr. in White, Indiana, and the May 16, 2003 murder of Julio Cartagena in East Chicago. In the Cartagena hit, at least one 2-6 member, Keontae King Pennington, has already pleaded guilty to murder in aid of racketeering, admitting his role. These killings were part of the gang's long-running feud with rival organizations for control of drug corners. The federal indictment named top-ranking 2-6 members like Adron Tansel of East Chicago and Jesus Chuchu Fuentes of Gary as orchestrators of violence. It even cast a light on an unusual character in the gang's ranks, 61-year-old Esther Mama D. Carrera, a Gary resident who was charged as an associate involved in a narcotics conspiracy. Seeing a woman in her 60s allegedly helping run a drug operation was a surprise. Mama D effectively acted as a gang matriarch, proof that the 2-6 involved multiple generations in crime. This gang's activities were not confined to any one city. They operated fluidly across East Chicago, Gary, Hammond, and even into neighboring Illinois and Pennsylvania in their quest for profit. When the 2-6 indictment dropped, officials made clear it was about delivering a final blow. "We will not hesitate to utilize the power of RICO to remove these individuals from the streets," vowed the U.S. Attorney for Northern Indiana. The charges included not just the murders, but also a litany of armed robberies, drug deals, and weapons offenses. For Gary residents, it was a relief to see another violent crew being torn up by the roots. Over 20+ years, the 2-6 gang had quietly built a foothold, contributing to the flow of drugs and the cycle of retaliatory shootings that plagued the area. Their takedown in 2014, coming on the heels of similar indictments against the Imperial Gangsters 2013 and Latin Kings 2017, signaled a concerted effort by law enforcement to dismantle gang networks that had long seemed untouchable. It also showed just how far back Gary's gang culture goes. The fact that the 2-6 indictment reached crimes from the early 1990s is a reminder that the seeds of today's violence were planted decades ago. And with characters like Mama D involved, it's clear that gang life in Gary can ensnare people of all ages, from teenagers on the block to elders who've been in the life for years. The 2-6 saga might not be as famous as some others, but it stands as one of the craziest long-term gang conspiracies uncovered in the city, mixing old-school gangland tactics with a family-like structure that spanned a generation. Late at night, a car cruises out of Gary, Indiana, heading northwest towards Chicago. The trunk is loaded with firearms freshly bought at an Indiana gun show earlier that day. Under the flickering neon of a Gary strip mall, a young man had paid cash for 4 Glock pistols and an AR-15 style rifle, claiming they were for himself. Moments later, in the parking lot, he handed those guns off to his partners, a textbook straw purchase unfolding in real time. The buyers didn't even make it out of Lake County before police, who'd been watching the gun show, pulled them over and seized the weapons. It was one small victory in a much larger battle against the iron pipeline of guns flowing from Indiana into the streets of Chicago. Gary, Indiana and Chicago, Illinois are separated by only 30 miles and a state line that marks a world of difference in gun laws. Chicago, plagued by gun violence for decades, has strict firearm regulations and until recently had no gun stores within city limits. Just across the border in Indiana, however, gun laws are far looser. This disparity has turned Northwest Indiana into an attractive weapons source for Chicago's criminals. As one official bluntly put it, you can go over the border to Indiana and get military-grade weapons if you have the money. The result is a tale of two cities bound by a lethal trade, Chicago's demand for guns and Gary's role as a supply hub.
Judy, the city of Chicago tonight trying to plug what investigators believe is one big part of an illicit gun pipeline between Indiana and Illinois. According to the lawsuit, West 4th Sports in Gary, Indiana is the #1 supplier of guns used in Chicago crimes during a 7-year period. And the lawsuit cites a 2019 I-Team report focusing on so-called straw purchases that result in missing guns. This Facebook post by West 4th Sports features all the gun types they sell and an employee describing the federal form buyers are required to fill out.
There really isn't much more to say about it. Once you're approved, you take the weapon with you.
But tonight, it is this paperwork that accuses family-owned West 4th of breaking U.S. laws by selling hundreds of guns to straw purchasers. Guns the city claims in the lawsuit were funneled to felons and Chicago gang members.
We're surrounded by states and other cities that have a much more lax gun control environment, where you can literally go over the border to Indiana, for us to say, and get military-grade weapons at any quantity that you want if you got the amount of money to spend.
As I-Team reporting has uncovered in recent years, the state border is a sieve and does little to pinch off an illegal gun pipeline between Indiana and Illinois. Our 2018 investigation linked illegal suburban Chicago gun sales to a supply line into cartel strongholds in Mexico. In 2019, we obtained data showing that of the 10,500 guns recovered in Illinois, half came from other states, and more than 1,500 were from Indiana.
On Chicago's south side, police frequently recover guns at crime scenes that trace straight back to Indiana. In one case, officers responding to a shooting found a teenager armed with a .40 caliber pistol purchased in Gary just weeks before. In another, a 9mm handgun bought at an Indiana shop turned up in the hands of a teen burglar on Chicago's south side. These are not isolated incidents. They reveal a pattern that begins in Indiana's gun markets and ends in bloodshed on Chicago's streets. Nearly 60% of guns recovered in Chicago come from out-of-state dealers, and more than 20% can be traced back to Indiana alone. In fact, a recent Chicago police gun trace study found that from 2013 to 2016, 21% of guns recovered in Chicago crimes were first purchased in Indiana. This pipeline of firearms, handguns, high-capacity pistols, even rifles, flows steadily across the border, exploiting every crack in Indiana's regulations. At the root of this cross-center gun traffic are the stark differences in gun laws between Illinois and Indiana. Indiana does not require background checks for private firearm sales or purchases at gun shows, unlike Illinois, which mandates checks and permits for almost all gun transactions. This loophole, often dubbed the gun show loophole, means a person can walk into a weekend gun show in Indiana and buy from a private seller with no questions asked, no paperwork, no background check. Straw purchasers, people who can pass a background check and buy guns to resell to criminals, take full advantage of this. They know that Indiana's weaker laws make it easy to stock up on weapons that would be much harder to obtain next door in Chicago. Chicago's leaders have long complained that their strict local gun measures are undercut by Indiana's lax approach. We are surrounded by states and cities that have a much more lax gun control environment, former Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot said. You can go over the border to Indiana and get military-grade weapons if you have the money. Indiana's relatively open market allows for cash purchases of multiple guns at once, often with minimal scrutiny. Federal law still requires licensed dealers to run background checks even in Indiana, but as one Indiana gun store owner put it, a customer can buy as many as they want. It's not our job to tell them no. Private sales between individuals, which are common at gun shows or via online listings, don't even require that much. Traffickers exploit this by arranging face-to-face sales that leave no paper trail. Even at licensed dealerships, warning signs often go unheeded. Take West 4th Sports in Gary, a small family-owned gun shop that became one of the top suppliers of Chicago's crime guns. Chicago's 2017 Gun Trace Report identified West 4th as the #3 source of guns recovered in Chicago crimes over a 7-year span, with over 850 guns traced back to that single Indiana store. Chicago authorities accused West 4th Sports of routinely selling to straw buyers who would come in frequently, pay cash for multiple guns, and immediately hand them off to others. In one eye-popping example, a 24-year-old Indiana man named Daryl Ary Jr. bought 19 firearms from West 4th in just 6 months, spending over $10,000 in cash. He later admitted those guns weren't for him. After each purchase, he drove about 12 miles west, crossing into Chicago, and resold the guns on the street for profit. Despite such red flags, repeat purchases, cash payments, West 4th staff kept welcoming Ary's business. Chicago's lawsuit against the shop noted that West 4th had sold at least 180 guns to around 40 buyers who were later charged with federal crimes. In other words, dozens of known traffickers repeatedly shopped there. As Chicago attorneys alleged, these eye-popping numbers were no accident, but the predictable outcome of a store that maximizes sales and profits by facilitating straw purchases. West 4th's owner, for his part, claimed he followed the letter of the law and that maybe the guy just likes guns, even as his parking lot filled with cars sporting Illinois plates. The commerce isn't limited to gun stores. Indiana's gun shows and classifieds are an even murkier gray market. On a spring day in 2025, undercover detectives in Lake County, Indiana, observed a 21-year-old Cushon Brown purchasing 5 firearms at a local gun show, 4 Glock handguns, and an AR-15 style rifle. Brown used a false Indiana address and lied on federal forms claiming the guns were for himself. As soon as the sale was done, officers watched Brown meet with 2 accomplices and hand over the guns in the parking lot. The trio had planned to drive those weapons out of Indiana, likely headed toward Chicago, but police intercepted them minutes later. All 3 were arrested and hit with felony charges for the straw purchases. This incident at a county fairgrounds gun show highlights how traffickers exploit Indiana's events where private sellers and permissive rules make it easy to stockpile guns. Some buyers will hit multiple sellers or shows in a short time, knowing they can ferry the arsenal to Chicago and sell each weapon for a hefty markup on the illicit market. The economic incentive is strong. A gun that sells for $300 in Indiana might fetch 2 or 3 times that amount in Chicago's underground market. A federal assessment noted that traffickers routinely recruit Indiana residents or even obtain fake Indiana IDs to purchase guns in bulk, then drive them into Chicago and other cities to sell at a premium. In effect, the lax laws in Indiana act as a wholesaler's paradise for gang members and gun runners. Buy low in Gary, sell high in Chicago. It's a deadly arbitrage, and the ones paying the price are the citizens on the receiving end of those guns.
It's new tonight at 6. There's been a major gun runner takedown by federal and city law enforcement.
Our NBC5 investigative team takes us inside this operation by the ATF and Chicago police. Those agencies teaming up to arrest dozens of suspected gun traffickers and seize hundreds of guns and kits used to make those automatic weapons.
You can shoot 30 rounds out of a magazine in less than 2 seconds by using these, and that's become a big issue just in general with law enforcement. Especially machine guns have been used in mass shootings, they've been used in robberies.
An arsenal of lethal firepower tonight off the streets of Chicago and the suburbs. These photos obtained by NBC5 Investigates reveal a stunning array of long guns and handguns, some converted to fire as fully automatic machine pistols. At least 171 firearms off the streets in what local and federal authorities tonight call a 2-month enhanced enforcement initiative.
These were ATF agents across the country that have experience in these types of investigations. We brought in undercover agents that have traveled the country, work in proactive investigations just like this, but we also heavily rely on our partnerships, especially with the Chicago Police Department.
The gun pipeline is intimately connected with the gangs that dominate Chicago's violent crime scene. Major Chicago oil gangs have long since extended their operations into Northwest Indiana, bringing their feuds, drug trade, and demand for weapons with them. Gary, Hammond, and East Chicago, the Indiana city of that name, might as well be outposts of Chicago's south and west sides. The same gangs that formed on Chicago streets, the Gangster Disciples, Black Disciples, Vice Lords, Latin Kings, and others, operate in these Indiana communities. Law enforcement intelligence reports have noted that after Chicago began tearing down notorious public housing projects in the 2000s, many displaced gang members moved into nearby Indiana cities, contributing to a surge of gang activity there. Gary, already struggling after the collapse of his steel industry, became a new frontier for these groups. By the late 2000s, Gary had one of the highest per capita homicide rates in the nation, driven largely by gang violence and the drug economy. On the streets of Gary, the gang hierarchies and alliances mirror Chicago's. The Folk Nation versus People Nation rivalry, folks include Gangster Disciples for example, while people include Vice Lords and Latin Kings, that colors Chicago's gang wars also exists in Gary and Hammond. It's almost the same as Chicago, one Gary native commented on Reddit, noting that older generations in Gary were heavy into GDs and Vice Lords. Another user observed that it makes sense. Gary is only a 30-minute drive from Chicago, and most of the 5 and 6 nations went there and took over.